It's really exciting to have you here,
Thank
Amanda.
you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, can you tell me a little bit about what we have in store today?
I have right now what's arising for me is an urge to really explain everything that I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
But I'm going to resist that urge in the spirit of mindfulness, right? Like it's really about staying present with what is happening in the moment.
Okay.
And our tendency is to want to get ahead of ourselves and know what's going to happen and make predictions and develop expectations about things.
That's usually what podcast intros are for.
Exactly. So we're kind of turning it on its head a little bit.
Okay. You hear that, everyone?
I'll invite you and listeners to just take a pause.
What'd you think of that?
So what's going on there?
It's Medcan's consulting psychologist, Dr. Amanda Beaman, talking about mindfulness and meditation.
Just give me one.
Okay.
One sec. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. What?
Okay. Are you ready? Do you need a minute?
Yeah. Okay. Wait. I should just this email. Just let me respond to this email and then we can do this.
Where are you right now? You're not here.
Okay.
You're not here,
right.
Chris.
Okay.
This episode is all about learning to be more present. How practicing something called mindfulness is more important than ever right now in an environment where there are so many different demands on Chris's time. And everybody's
time. It's Teams, it's Slack, it's Snapchat notifications for my kids. I don't know.
I have a group chat that's always going.
Yeah, it's way too easy to get lost in a time or a place where we are not, thanks to technology these days.
Yes, but being mindful about our bodies and our sensations, our surroundings, that works your brain's muscles. It can contribute to your attention span, the ability to concentrate, that technology might be damaging. It can also help with our ability to handle stress, to cope with difficult times, and to listen to others.
Amazing. Today, Dr. Amanda Beaman is joined by Medcan's Clinical Director of Psychology, Dr. Jack Muskat. The two of them explore what exactly mindfulness is, how it can help, and how you can do it wherever you are without anything but your mind and your body.
Also, if you like what you hear, later this week we'll be posting a special mini episode featuring a guided 10-minute meditation session from Dr. Amanda Beaman, which you can refer back to whenever you like. When the interview begins, Dr. Jack Muskat has just joined Dr. Amanda Beaman in the Eat, Move, Think recording studio. Dr. Muskat's had a stressful day, and they decide he could benefit from one of Dr. Beaman's quick 2-minute mindfulness sessions. You're welcome to join in and follow Dr. Beaman's prompts. If you prefer to skip right to the interview, jump ahead to the podcast's 6-minute mark. Here's Dr. Amanda Beaman.
What I'll invite you to do, Jack, is take your glasses off, closing your eyes, noticing the weight of your body and its connection with the surface it's resting on. Noticing your feet and their connection with the floor. The length of the spine. And thinking about the crown of the head gently reaching for the ceiling. And now turning your attention inward to notice sensations of breathing wherever they're showing up most prominently for you today. This may be noticing the rise and fall of the chest, or the air moving past your nostrils, or the expansion and contraction of the belly. Choosing one of these areas to focus your attention. Follow the breath as it enters and leaves the body. And your attention may get pulled away to thinking, or sounds, or other focuses of attention. Just gathering the attention back up when you notice that happen, and bring it back to the area you chose to focus on. Breathing in and breathing out. And now expanding your attention to include the body as a whole. Noticing the body in space, the air around the body, And when you're ready, you can open your eyes if they're closed. What did you notice?
First of all, you're amazing at what you do. I loved listening to your voice. As soon as I closed my eyes, I felt a calmness appearing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bright room, and it just felt a little more centered, and just become aware of what's going on without forcing it.
Mm-hmm. A lot happened there, right? In
Yeah.
that little 2 minutes.
Yes, a lot happened.
Yeah.
And it was a good transition.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that. It was a nice way to start things off.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Eat, Move, Think. I'm delighted to have one of my colleagues here at Medcan, Dr. Amanda Beaman. It's great to have you here on the show, Amanda. Tell me, how has your day been going so far? But before you do, let me tell you about my day. It has been so stressful that I am so thrilled that you're here to teach us about mindfulness and meditation, something that I need very desperately. So on that note, I'll turn it back to you and just see how you're doing. And
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Beautiful day. That always helps. And I'm looking forward to this discussion. I think it's going to be interesting.
I'm delighted because everyone talks about mindfulness and meditation. We're always talking about being chill, being calm. And a lot of us don't even understand what it means. So maybe we could start with basic terms. What is mindfulness? What is meditation? What's the difference between them? How do you use them? And how do you think we should be understanding them in the proper clinical and scientific way that you employ it?
So I think you're right, obviously. That, by the way, I think it's true that these terms are thrown around a lot, and it's kind of like can get a little bit confusing. They're used interchangeably, often mindfulness and meditation. So mindfulness you could think of as a psychological state of being aware of the present moment, what your experience is in the present moment. And then meditation would be one way of facilitating mindfulness. And there's other ways, but meditation is one way to facilitate that becoming aware of your internal and external experience in the present moment.
So when people say they're doing things like mindful exercise or mindful eating or mindful whatever, what are they really saying?
They're saying that they're paying attention to the present moment, to something specific in the present moment, because there's a lot happening in the present moment. So we can choose to focus our attention on one thing or a couple of things in the present moment. So if it's eating, for example, you might be paying a lot of attention to the sensory experience of eating, the jaw moving, the flavors in the mouth, even the act of swallowing, right? So I think that would be kind of what mindfulness is, that awareness of the present moment.
So I'm actually going to back it up a little because I think we're talking about a solution when I haven't even asked you about the problem. So why are people talking about mindfulness?
It's kind of a big question, but I think that, people are probably talking about it because we're all looking for ways to manage stress better, right? The fact of the matter is that we're not going to get rid of stressors. Like they're there forever. And so when we're talking about mindfulness and practicing mindfulness, what we're really talking about is learning a way of relating to stressors that may be different in a mindful way. When we relate to our stressors with mindfulness, a lot of things can happen that can possibly change our experience of the stress, the way we're handling the stress, managing it. That, I think, is probably the biggest thing that I see. And of course, there's research evidence showing that mindfulness does help with the ways that we manage stress or anxiety linked to lower levels of depression. Certain mindfulness programs prevent relapse in depression. There's certainly an evidence base to suggest that this is something to do, not just an idea that somebody had, but it's actually backed up with science as well.
What has the research shown on how mindfulness, which is a mind activity, how does it affect our brain and how does it affect our functioning? What is the research showing around, psychological health out of something that seems just very meditative and spiritual almost?
Well, it does show that it changes activity in the brain. And so different areas of the brain light up when we're engaged in a mindfulness practice, specifically areas of the brain responsible for interoception. So our present moment experience of what sensations happening in the body. And that's then been linked to, lower levels of anxiety, stress, an ability to manage stress differently, right? And then I think a lot about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy because I used to work with Zindel Siegel, who's one of the founders of the therapy. And he over time, conducted a number of randomized controlled trials and found that mindfulness-based cognitive therapy can prevent relapse and depression. So, if you think about how mindfulness works, it makes sense, right? Because if we can become more aware of our thinking patterns and how that interacts with our physiology or our physical sensations and whatnot, if we develop this skill of becoming more aware, then we're kind of catching it sooner. Like relapse and depression is often, it's starting well before we realize we're in a relapse, right? There's negative thought patterns starting, and then we're starting to try to think our way out of it, right? And MBCT was shown to prevent relapse and depression. That was a very big finding in the field. But we can work on how we relate to our stressors, and we each tend to have a stress signature, right? We have patterned habitual ways of responding to stress. And so what the mindfulness program is teaching is to understand how we habitually respond to stressors. Sometimes the way we respond is not in a helpful way and actually compounds the problem. So, for one person, it might be turning to food. For another, it might be turning to alcohol or to distraction. We're generally wired up to avoid negative emotions.
And what you're saying, and I think what's so important, is that mindfulness is bringing us back, because all of those other obsessive or avoidant behaviors that bring us into a zoned out, almost depersonalized state is the opposite. You want to, instead of becoming unaware of what's going on, you want to become aware of and then work through it. And then that becomes reinforcing, so you're not afraid of the pain anymore.
Right. Yeah. But the longer we avoid, the lower our tolerance is, right? And we know this from anxiety. We know in working on something like a phobia, right? Like what started out as a one-time thing can turn into a lifetime of being afraid of something if the avoidance continues. And so it's kind of similar in that way. And in a little way, it's a bit of exposure work. We're kind of dipping our toes in with being present with uncomfortable sensations, uncomfortable thoughts, allowing them to be there, and over time, maybe learning how to respond rather than react.
Our audience knows, and we've all been living through this, but we've had an interesting couple of years, the pandemic, and I think that the stress that people have experienced through social isolation, through feeling dislocated, through not being able to have the outlets for what they were doing, would speak to what mindfulness can actually help people achieve. You can maybe say a little bit about how you've, in your own practice, seen the impact of mindfulness and how that's changed.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the mindfulness itself doesn't change. That's a capacity we all have, right? Inside all of us, we can all at any time, drop into a mindful state. People had stress, obviously, before the pandemic, and we're looking for ways to manage stress. But I guess during the pandemic, there's just been more stress, more stressors, and more uncertainty. And so when that happens, I think people want to get certainty about things. And so this can lead to a lot of thinking, right? A lot of analyzing, a lot of worrying, attempts to try to gain certainty, to try to gain control. And our thinking ramps up. And that, of course, can lead to problems like sleep difficulty and anxiety and problems with depression when our mind is constantly engaged in this repetitive cycle of trying to figure things out, I guess, for lack of a better expression. This is what I've seen people coming with, just that brain not turning off, lying awake in bed at night and just thinking about everything and trying to find some solace or some answers.
You've just described 80% of my patients, and the other 20% haven't shown up yet. They're all talking about the constant distractibility, the constant negative self-talk, the inability to feel they're accomplishing anything. And I will ask people, what are you doing for it? Are you using mindfulness, meditation? And most say, well, I tried it once and it didn't work. Is it a tool? Is it a technique? Is it an attitude? Help us understand how you would orient us to what our expectations should be so we could set realistic goals.
Yes. Yeah. That's a really good point. I also might have patients who say, yeah, I tried it and it didn't work. So I got frustrated and gave up. And I think that has to do a lot with the expectations that people have going into it. And, that's what we do as human beings. We have expectations about things. We have ideas about the way things should be. And those expectations may be a result of what they've read online or what a physician has told them, like, oh, do mindfulness, it'll be help you with your depression. So they might go into it thinking, oh, I'm supposed to feel better. Right. And yes, over time and with a regular practice, mindfulness has been shown to lead to improvements in things like stress, anxiety, depression, focus, all those things. However, the practice itself from day to day may change. And really, at the heart of it, what we're doing in a mindfulness practice is we're practicing training our attention to come to the present moment, to some focus in the present moment. We're not doing a relaxation exercise, right? I think that's one of the main misinterpretations that people have about it. And so when people start doing it and they're not feeling relaxed, then they think they're doing it wrong. So then judgment is coming in, right? It's like, oh, I have an expectation that I'm supposed to feel relaxed. I'm not feeling relaxed. I'm actually feeling a little bit worse because now I'm paying attention to what's happening and I'm noticing that I'm actually pretty anxious. So now I'm feeling more anxious and this isn't helping and I must be doing it wrong, so I'm going to stop. When in actual fact, this is kind of what we want. We want to be becoming aware of what is happening for us. What is our internal experience? The meditation that you and I did, you happen to have a positive experience. But for example, when we do our very first session of our mindfulness program, we do our first meditation, exercise, or body scan. And at the end of it, the people who had the positive experience pipe up and they raise their hand, oh, that was great. I felt calm, And then there's one brave person usually that kind of puts up their hand and says, actually, that was kind of difficult. I was uncomfortable. I noticed, anxiety or, stress, or I wanted to move, or there could be many things that came up. And then once that person says something, then a couple more pipe up and say, yeah, like I also didn't have. And this is a really important session for that reason, because this is it. We're paying attention to our present moment experience. We're becoming aware of what's going on for us. Sometimes that's a pleasant endeavor. Sometimes there's a lot going on there that is unpleasant. And so the practice is really about becoming aware of that and then working with it wisely.
I was looking up some research on mindfulness and I wanted to be sure that I had prepared. So the two lines that I found were mindfulness is about becoming aware. And the second part, and non-judgmental. And so I was then thinking about all the negative self-talk that people give themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking of what you were just saying about those people that come out of it and they say it was positive and those that say it wasn't. And I was going to ask you whether those that say it wasn't, what were they aware of? And I see this clinically, and because we have a very high-functioning executive population that's go, 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 get it done, they're not paying attention to what's going on inside them. And when
Mm-hmm.
they do, it can be scary.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. The perfectionists in the world, they're maybe approaching mindfulness in the same way as they approach other things. So you can almost think about the mindfulness practice as a window into what's happening outside the mindfulness practice. So a high-achieving perfectionistic type person might approach mindfulness when they're encountering difficulty that might lead to some negative self-talk, like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. I should be feeling relaxed. I should be able to bring my attention back to my breath more easily. So this is interesting, right? Because now we're seeing, oh, okay, interesting. When you pay attention to what comes up for you in this moment, you're noticing some harsh self-criticism. I wonder where else this might come up. And
You
this
know,
is
yeah.
starts a conversation of, well, yeah, I do notice it. It does come up sometimes at work. This is how we can link the practice to other things.
And I think it's wonderful because, when you have two psychologists talking, we use big words like variable and evidence, and the other one is meta awareness. And to get people to be aware of how they're being aware of things
Mm-hmm.
is really interesting, because when you're unaware, you're just saying, okay, I'm a perfectionist, I'm not doing this right, which isn't the point.
Mm-hmm.
And then they become aware of it through the experience, even if it's negative, as you're describing,
Right.
which then gives them hopefully that insight to
Mm-hmm.
approach it in a more open, non-judgmental, non-goal oriented way.
Non-goal oriented, yeah. There's different catchphrases around mindfulness. This one is actually accurate. It's a state of being, not a state of doing. So we're approaching mindfulness to be with what's happening in the present moment, to allow it to be there as it is, and to cultivate this attitude of curiosity, right? So I'm going to pay attention to what's happening, and in a curious way, that kind of helps with the judgmental piece. It's like, oh, interesting. I just had a thought about what a bad mother I am because I forgot to send my daughter to school with her sun hat today. Interesting, right? So then it kind of slows things down. So then we can take a step back and go, wait a second, like, is there another way I could talk to myself? Or, oh, when I had that thought about myself, I really felt this pit in my stomach. So now, moving forward, when I notice that pit in my stomach, maybe it means that I'm thinking something that's not very nice. And so maybe I'll pay attention to it next time. So it's all around building awareness, right? That, as you said in the very beginning.
Right. And take us through a little bit more around the process, because I don't even know, how long should a session be? How often should they happen? Can they be something that are reactive to things, or do you build them into your schedule? And how do you then build on that awareness that, oh, I didn't send my daughter to school with a sun hat, I must be a bad mother? Is there not so much a best practice, but a certain protocol that people need to go through, that you don't just get it once?
Yeah, I think it's a work in progress always. So it's called a practice for a reason. It's because we never get there, right? We don't reach some pinnacle of mindfulness and we can stop, right? It's kind of like exercise. We don't say one day, oh, I've done my exercise and now I'm done for the rest of my life. We practice at exercise because the practice of it over time leads to health benefits. So mindfulness is similar, practicing the skill, if you will, of bringing your attention to the present moment. And so, as we know, as psychologists, if you want to, see change, you want to do it regularly. So there needs to be some consistency with it to notice some change. It's probably best to have a guide at first. There's different ways to do that. There's apps, of course. A really nice way to foray into it is to join a group. There's going to be other people there who are going through this process with you. There's going to be a debrief at the end of all the practices that we do. So we talk about what came up and, even correcting misinterpretations like, oh, I was supposed to be relaxed through that and I wasn't. That's actually really important to know that this is not a necessary part of mindfulness. So I would highly recommend a group, but it's a bit of a time commitment. So the other option would be to follow an app. They do like challenges, like, 10 weeks of mindfulness kind of thing. And then there's some accountability there. That would be what my suggestion of how to get started.
I'm a little confused only in that when we did our mindfulness exercise, I'm just sitting here and I didn't have to go to a group, and I didn't have to worry about who's going to be leading the group and where's the group and where do I park. You can figure out my negative self-talk as we're talking. But I'm trying to understand how much time is needed. I mean, if people aren't going to go because the bar is too high, and I love the idea of a group, but then is all mindfulness, or is it different? Like, can I still do like 2 or 3 minutes in the morning?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
You can.
And then the idea of it being guided, how do I know where to find those kinds of resources? And then can you contrast it with the app? Because I agree with you that an app would be very helpful, but what should I be looking for in an app, and how do I know that it's working so that when it's not working, I know what's not working?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a few apps that I would recommend. I mean, Calm app, Headspace, 10% Happier is one of my favorites. I would say, though, it would be really important to have a guide in the beginning, especially if there's other mental health issues going on. I think there is an idea out there that mindfulness can be like a panacea for all your problems. Like if your physician might say to you, oh, you're depressed, you should meditate. Well, that could be hard to do if you're in an episode of depression. I wouldn't actually recommend sitting still and meditating. I would suggest joining a group if you actually have a diagnosis of depression, because there'll be leaders who can kind of help guide you and, you can talk to about what your experience is and so on. So I think if you're going to do it on your own, it would be best done if you're feeling fairly well. Like, we're all stressed, so that's okay. But if it's something more like a clinical diagnosis, talk to a practitioner about it first. Get advice around that, about how to go about it before you're engaging with it. You could go to the Center for Mindfulness Studies in Toronto. There's a lot of resources there. They may even have a list of practitioners that they've trained. Ideally, you would want to find someone who's had the training. There's a very specific training protocol that mindfulness instructors go through. They're trained to kind of decipher, what's going on and whether or not mindfulness is the appropriate approach. Most people will benefit from mindfulness. I don't want to scare people off. It's just, if there's something more serious going on, I would suggest talking to a practitioner about it.
I mean, in effect, and for all of our listeners, I mean, mindfulness is a non-intrusive, guided, supportive experience that I would imagine that the facilitator or the guide is going to be mindful of how the person is reacting so that they can get the most out of it. We talked earlier about modern times and how people are suffering from distractibility and isolation and negative self-talk and lack of meaning. That alone is enough to be able to give you the incentive to do some mindfulness, because if you can't pay attention to yourself, you can't pay attention to anyone else around you. Can you tell us a little bit about what the benefits are in terms of, I'm already doing mindfulness, so I'm sort of okay, but you were saying it's like exercise. So let's say you're my trainer and you're watching what I'm doing and you're going, no, Jack, you can do better. Not perfectionism better,
No.
but there's some things you can improve at. Is it scaffolded? Is it like, because you say it's always an ongoing practice, but what
Right.
are some of the levels that we can be thinking about?
Yeah, I would definitely start small, especially if you're doing it on your own. Start with, 5-10 minutes a day. Where the group becomes important, or where a practitioner becomes important, is that it's going to get deeper, right? So the longer someone is in a mindfulness practice, the more that's going to come up. If I'm sitting for 35 minutes, paying attention to my experience, there's a reason why we do meditations for 35 minutes in our mindfulness group. It's because there's a honeymoon period for the first 5 to 10 minutes often. And then we're getting into the real stuff that's starting to happen. There's discomfort, right? Maybe I'm physically uncomfortable. And then I'm noticing, how am I responding to my physical discomfort? Am I being self-critical? Like, oh, you should have found a better position. Now here you are, you're uncomfortable and you have to disrupt everybody. Or is it taking me back to a memory that I had of physical discomfort? There could be anything that comes up. So the longer the practice, the deeper it becomes, the more room there is for things to emerge. And then that's where, after the practice, it's debriefed with a practitioner. And we're asking, okay, what came up for you? Oh, interesting. What did you notice? Oh, I noticed I was having some self-critical thoughts when I became uncomfortable. Okay. Does this happen elsewhere where you might have self-critical thoughts? Right? So this is the deepening of it.
Yeah. And what you're really saying, now that I'm kind of flipping over to the other side, is that mindfulness is a kind of stealth therapy. Because from what you're saying, and I think it's really important, because I didn't understand this, even though I'm in this business of therapy and psychotherapy that I'm still stuck on that relaxation,
Yeah.
a day at the spa,
Yeah,
like
no,
just
it's-
no worries. But what you're saying, which I think is far more important, is about building emotional resilience through being able to sit with uncomfortable feelings and thoughts and not judge yourself, but experience them without feeling desperate or panicky.
Mhm. Well, the desperation and the panic may come up, right? So what are we doing? We're gradually staying with that. You know, that's why we start small. There's attitudes that are cultivated in a mindfulness practice. So there's the very practical aspect of it, which is we're sitting down for 10 or 20 minutes and we're focusing on our breath. And when we notice our attention wander away, we're bringing our attention back to the breath. That's the practice, right? In doing that, we're now cultivating certain attitudes, because if we have this willingness to sit for the 10 or 20 minutes and notice our attention wandering and bring it back, even though it can be difficult, if we have this willingness to stay with our experience, now we're cultivating patience and acceptance of what is coming up right now. And maybe even some gratitude, right? Of, oh, here I am, alive, I'm breathing. It's a cultivation of a number of things. You know, Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's kind of the founder of it, brought it to the founder of mindfulness meditation, not of Buddhism, where it originated, but he talks about 9 attitudes that are cultivated. I can't possibly speak to all of them, but certainly the acceptance, patience, gratitude, this notion of beginner's mind, right? Coming to something as if we're seeing it for the first time, that sense of curiosity that we're bringing to the practice, which helps with judgment.
I had a patient tell me a couple of weeks ago that, and she's your typical high-achieving executive mom who didn't give the sun hat to her kid for the school and everything. And it just came up in the session. She said she went to a yoga class and she was just doing something, I don't know, a move, and she wasn't aware of herself, and she just felt so happy. She hasn't been happy in a long time, and she just felt happy. I said, who was feeling happy? And she said, the real me. And then she started crying. And I think we've got so many layers of stuff, so much baggage that gets in the way of who we are. What was going on with her? Because I felt it was a genuine moment for her. She wasn't planning it. She's a planner.
Yeah.
And it just happened through her paying attention to something.
To the present moment. Yoga is another meditative activity that can lead to mindfulness, right? So chances are, I mean, I don't know her and didn't hear what she said. If I was going to probe, I would ask a few more questions like, you know, what do you think happened there? It sounds like she was very present with sensations in the body maybe. And what this does is it interrupts the constant internal self-talk, right? When we are thinking, analyzing, judging, it's in the prefrontal cortex, you know, we're very busy. And then when we're paying attention to our present moment bodily experience, there's other regions of the brain that light up. And so it's a letting go of that constant self-analysis. Jon Kabat-Zinn calls it selfing, right? Me, and me, right? That's what we're going through all day long. Where there's a show about me. And so when we're paying attention to the present moment, to bodily sensations, we've dropped out of that. Maybe that's what happened for her.
Yeah.
And the crying might have been like, how do I get that back?
Yes, exactly.
Because now I'm back into this selfing, you know, me, myself, and I, like the show of me. And I want to have that experience again of dropping back into the present moment.
Right. And I think the other thing that I at least learned, and none of us planned for the pandemic and none of us were trained for it, but what I learned was the whole idea of embodied cognition, that our previous theories of the mind and the brain were that it was like an information processing machine in your head. It was like a big computer. But in the last 20 years, we've learned that 90% of the brain controls motor function, and that our cognition can rise up through just physiological change. So all I was recommending is people take walks in nature, and not understanding unwittingly how that really ties into mindfulness, because when you're walking, different neural pathways are forming. And when you're in nature, seeing where you are, the little you, not the big I, then you get a better sense of the wondrous moment of being alive, I guess. And the gratitude piece comes in as well. So now I'm doing my exercise. I've got my apps. I've got my online group. I'm right into it. We already described that it's not about relaxation or being happy or zoning out or that stuff. But what can I expect as an outcome? Is it going to improve my sleep? Is it going to improve my relationship with my partner? Is it going to improve my relationship with my kids? And how will I know it? What are the things that I should be aware of after I'm doing the mindfulness?
So from an evidence point of view, we can definitely say that mindfulness training has led to reductions in feelings of stress, anxiety, depression, certainly very helpful in pain management. So people reporting that they are managing their pain better. They're not, sometimes not experiencing the same intensity of pain, but it's more like the relationship to the pain, kind of feeling like they have a better handle on how to manage it. And then attention and focus, of course. So, if these things are improving, then of course it's going to lead to improvements elsewhere, right? And if you're managing stress better, then maybe you're not as short with your wife or your kids. If you're able to notice when you're becoming, pulled away from the present moment and you're sitting at the dinner table with your family and you're ruminating about work, right? After a mindfulness practice, you might be better able to notice that, oh, I'm not here right now.
Right.
So I'm going to bring myself here. I'm going to take a minute. I'm just going to bring my attention to my hands, bring my attention to my feet. I'm going to take a little breath. And then I'm going to look at my child's eyes, her eyelashes. I'm going to ground myself in what is happening right now. And when we're present with people, as opposed to preoccupied with something else, we're better listeners, more empathetic. We're probably calming to them, right? They're getting less frustrated with us because we're not having to ask them to repeat themselves because we weren't paying attention to what they said. You can only imagine, it's kind of like the butterfly effect, right? You can imagine the multitude of ways that becoming a more aware person impacts your life.
One of the things that I really found intriguing about mindfulness is that it helps you disconnect from an emotion so you don't have to react to it. You can just look at it, particularly negative emotions like anger, rage, jealousy, frustration. And I think that gives you a sense of power because so much of what we do is reactive and we're stressed out and we're feeling burnt out. But what you're talking about is we can just put it on pause and observe it without feeling enslaved by it.
Yeah, it's so freeing. I think that was a real aha moment for me when I was completing some training as a participant. And the exercise was, we were in a meditation and this was further on in the training. I wouldn't recommend people do to start. But the instructor said, she got us there to present, and then she said, what I want you to do is I want you to bring into your awareness a difficult problem that you've been dealing with. Not 100-pound weight, like a 10-pound weight. And just notice what's happening. And of course, my heart rate started speeding up. I could feel my chest getting tight. And then her instruction was, okay, let's watch, let's watch what's happening here. And could you describe to yourself, could you label what you're feeling, what's going on for you? So I labeled tightness in my chest, pit in my stomach. And it was so freeing because, once I did that, it's taking an observer perspective, you've got some distance from it. It dissipated. I was shocked that was my kind of aha, like, oh, when you actually approach something in this way, and pay attention to it and observe it in this very particular way, paradoxically, because we think if we approach something and pay attention to it, it's going to worsen, right? I think that's people's assumption. It's like, I'm going to avoid my feelings because I don't like them. They make me feel bad. So I'm just going to binge watch Netflix instead. when we actually approach our feelings and that discomfort and we label it, we objectify it in some way, it has an effect of dissipating, right? And this is really what mindfulness is about. It's about gradually becoming better able to do that for ourselves, to approach things.
And we need it today more than ever. I mean, the news out there is so bad on so many levels that we don't have to go into it. And if we simply react to things and feel that we're responsible for them, then we're never going to get out of that negative feedback loop. I think it was just terrific having you on and sharing your insights around mindfulness meditation. The meditation exercise we did has mellowed me out, so I'm feeling pretty good, Amanda. And can you just leave us with maybe 3 ideas or 3 thoughts that can help our listeners better understand how mindfulness can help them in their lives and in their futures?
Okay, the 3 points that I think would be, it's an attentional exercise. It's not a relaxation exercise. So if you started and you're not feeling particularly relaxed at the start, that's okay. That's part of it. 2, there is an evidence base behind this. This isn't just, an idea someone came up with. And 3, part of what we're doing here is we're learning to be with what our experience is, whatever it is, pleasant, unpleasant, comfortable, uncomfortable. And as we do that, we learn to manage stress differently in a more adaptive way. One of the attitudes that we're cultivating with mindfulness is that beginner's mind, that sense of curiosity and openness. And so just give it a try and bring that openness and curiosity to it, as opposed to, perhaps coming into it with expectations of something changing. Because once we do that, then it kind of, then we're getting all muddled up with our expectations as opposed to being with what the practice is about. So just trying it out, I think, is always a good advice.
And as one of my professors said, let the universe unfold as it should.
Yes.
So thank you again, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
That was Medcan's Clinical Director of Psychology, Dr. Jack Muskat, in conversation with Dr. Amanda Beaman, consulting psychologist at Medcan.
I just love her voice. We'll post episode highlights and links you can visit on our website, eatmovethinkpodcast.com.
If you like this episode, stay tuned for our bonus mini episode coming later this week, featuring a 10-minute guided mindfulness session with Dr. Amanda Beaman. Say hello, send us a tip or a suggestion by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com, and follow Medcan on Twitter and Instagram at MedcanLiveWell.
Eat Move Think is produced by Ghost Bureau. Jasmine Ratch is managing producer. Social media and strategy support is from Chantal Gertan and Andrew Imax. Executive producer is me, Christopher Scholgen.
We'll be back soon with a new episode examining the latest in health and wellness.
This podcast is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with the specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.